The court has no actual power. It is by design, right? It is the weakest branch of government. Go back and read the Federalist Papers, my friends. It has neither the purse nor the sword. It has no army. It has nothing except public reliance upon the court as an institution that does its job. The power inheres not in 9 justices who don't have an army and don't have a purse. The power inheres in the sovereign citizens who can choose to say that court is vast, or who can choose to say we are vast.
Hello, and welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. This year's Supreme Court term saw decisions on cases related to birthright citizenship and nationwide injunctions, religious freedom and education, transgender rights and gender-affirming care, gun violence, and the executive branch's apparent authority to do whatever it damn well pleases at all times. To discuss how the SCOTUS term played out this year, I am joined by my friend and brilliant legal scholar, Dahlia Lithwick. Dahlia is a senior editor at Slate who has been writing about the Supreme Court and jurisprudence for over 20 years. Dahlia is also the host of Amicus, the award-winning podcast about the law and the Supreme Court, and her work has appeared everywhere from The New Yorker to The New Republic. A visiting professor at multiple universities, Dahlia is a graduate of Stanford and Yale, has won a litany of journalism awards, and is the author of numerous books, including Lady Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and one of the nation's foremost legal commentators, Dahlia Lithwick. Welcome back, Dahlia.
Hello, friend. Hi.
Hello, friend. This is so depressing, Dahlia. You know I love having you here, right? Oh, I know. You know I love talking about the courts with you. I love having you here. And like I had you here last year when the court term ended, and we discussed how these rulings just kept telling people in America that some people were worth more than others, that some people got a different version of the law or a more beneficial reading of the law. And I feel like a year later, it might be even worse. I mean, what do you think? Where do you think America stands right now when it comes to the highest court in the land?
So I think I want to say two things. As crap as it can be when it comes to the highest court of the land. Like, I'm not going to mince words and we'll talk about it. But I want to start by saying, if you had told me in January that the district courts, that the lower courts, that Bush appointees and Reagan appointees and Donald Trump appointees, and across the boards, you would have lower court judges in case after case after case saying no to this president, I would have been more surprised than I have been astonished at the yeoman's work that the district courts, so the lower federal courts and the appeals courts, have been doing. And so that's kind of the good news, right? That people, including, I mean, in some of these cases, seriously, people Donald Trump put on the bench who were rated unqualified to be judges, who have stepped up and really done superb work, knocking back, not just, I know we're going to talk about birthright citizenship, but like impoundment and refusal to give aid to foreign countries that are in need of aid. And, time after time after time, we have seen phenomenal work from lower court judges. And I want to give them like a big honking gold star because they're doing it in the face of threats of impeachment, direct threats from the president. We've seen a spectacular increase in death threats, right? Doxing, creepy pizza deliveries to judges' houses. So they have every reason to be like, I didn't get into it for this. They've been astonishing. That said, the buck stops at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has been, in ways that have equally astonished me, appalling.
Yeah. It feels like the Supreme Court every term deals with now just a bunch of these blockbuster decisions that just change the very fabric of the country. Like a couple years ago, we were here talking about the overturning of Roe. Then the year after that, we were talking about the president is above the law. And now we're at this point where it's like, yeah, I guess the executive branch is able to gut every single federal institution if they want to. Like it's just year after year from this court of game-changing rulings. And it's exhausting to watch. And it is wonderful to hear you say, like, look, you have all these lower court appointees who you wouldn't necessarily think are in the corner of fairness or justice, depending on who they were put into office by. And yet they're standing up for the law. They're standing up for the Constitution. They're standing up for the people and our rights under a constitutional republic. And that is a wonderful surprise. And it's what they should do, but it's also a wonderful surprise. And yet still, this 6-3 court, right, is just allowing chaos to reign. And it's a hard thing to stomach.
The other thing that I would just say that's really dramatic is, you and I, as you say, we've had this conversation lots of times. But what's different this year is that the court's doing it in a really nefarious way. And so I want to be super clear that there's like a regular docket, which is what I think of as like front stage, right? These are the cases that the court hears. And by the way, this year they heard fewer than they have heard in certainly my entire career since the Civil War, right? They don't even hear 70 cases anymore. That's what's called the merits docket, right? And those are the cases that are briefed and they're argued and the court issues an opinion, right? There's a ruling, there's a decision. That is the term that ended at the end of June with the blockbuster Birthright Citizenship case, right? But then there's this other docket called the shadow docket. And that's not a name that I made up. It's a name that is used for the court's emergency docket. And so if folks are listening to us right now and they're like, wait, Dahlia, you just said the term ended the last week of June with Birthright Citizenship. Why am I still hearing news almost every day about something coming out of the Supreme Court? Well, that's because they're using what's called the shadow docket, their emergency docket that they used to use for death penalty cases, right? You need an emergency docket, but you don't use it 20 times. We've now seen time after time after time after time. Every time the Trump administration loses a case, they race it up to the shadow docket, to the emergency docket. And then you end up with decisions. And I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, like the one that came a week ago, right, on Monday, where the court essentially agreed to turn the lights off at the Department of Education. And they did it with a ruling that is unsigned, that is unexplained. It's a couple of sentences. Don't actually know which justices participated. They don't say. We have 3 dissenters, so we know who didn't participate in, and
we can kind of guess
the usual suspects. But the fact that what is happening front stage is not even as bad as what's happening backstage in the shadows, without explication, without the justices doing the one job they have, which is show their work, explain their reasoning, that's what's changed. And so what I want to say is it's really tempting to listen to the story the court wants us to hear, right? And that's a story about a term that starts on the first Monday of October and ends at the end of June. And then the justices go off to Aspen and give their speeches and we can all rest. That's not this term. This term has been as explosive behind the scenes with decisions, as I've said many times, that are like back of the napkin decisions, just saying, okay, here's what we're overturning. Okay, Trump gets to do this. Okay, Trump gets to do that, without any explanation or any reasoning. And when the court is working in the shadows, like it's doing right now, it's not just, like you say, that it's a 6-3 conservative supermajority Trump court. It's a court that is issuing decisions that essentially just say, because we say so. And that is the stuff of nightmares.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly well said. I think that it's not surprising that it's happening this term because now Trump is in charge, right? So like, who's going to stop them if they're not going to stop him, right? Like it's sort of like a snake eating its own tail situation. But you also have to say, like, this is not how these decisions are supposed to be made. We're supposed to have a merits docket. The shadow docket is for emergencies only. But it's sort of the same way Trump is working the executive branch. We're not supposed to make laws based on executive orders. It's supposed to go through Congress because they represent the people. And right now we're having like executive order after executive order after executive order making laws, which is not how we're supposed to make laws. And then it is the Supreme Court that's backing up those executive orders. So again, we're in a snake eating the tail situation. And you were mentioning it. I feel like one of the most talked about decisions and victory for the Trump administration this year was when that 6-person conservative majority ruled on this birthright citizenship case. And we want to be clear, it's not really that they were ruling on birthright citizenship per se, but the limited ability of federal courts to issue universal injunctions that block executive orders nationwide. That's really what they ended up ruling on. And this was a big one because it meant that the lower courts, the ones you're saying are actually upholding the law, could no longer rule something was unconstitutional and then expand that to the rest of the country. In this case, they were saying, you know, you're not necessarily a citizen if you were born here. And that should be like, well, yes, you are. And that applies to the whole country based on the Constitution. And the way the Supreme Court ruled, they basically said in this case, in every single district, you would have to file your own lawsuit and prove your own case, even when the fact of the issue is it's like obviously deeply unconstitutional. It should just apply to the whole country. We shouldn't have to have millions of different lawsuits. But that's already being challenged, right? Like, so that's a good thing. It's already being challenged in a lower court. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two important stories to tell about that birthright citizenship case are the one you just told, which is exactly right. This comes to the court having gone through multiple lower courts, multiple appeals court. Trump has lost at every turn. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment is abundantly clear that if you were born in the United States, you are a citizen. This was done, right, by the Reconstruction Congress to make sure there was nobody whose citizenship turned on what state they were brought in, right? This was to reverse the evils of slavery. And it's very clear. We know why they did it. And this was, by the way, codified into statute multiple times. This is the law of the land. And Trump, as you say, first day in office, signs an executive order, just sort of whiting out like, oh, what they really mean is unless you are the child of a legal citizen or a legal permanent resident, it doesn't matter if your parents are here on a valid visa. Doesn't matter why they're here. You're not a citizen. So doing away with, post-Civil War, absolute understanding codified, as I said, in statutes and in case law that the court has never touched, right? So you're right. It's a fanciful, insane thing. And Trump loses and loses and loses and loses. And it gets to the Supreme Court. And instead of saying to the Supreme Court, we want you to decide the meaning of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, does it mean what Trump says? They don't even raise that issue. They just say, we're just going to put that aside for a minute and instead ask you to rule on universal injunctions. And you're exactly right about this too. Universal injunctions have been around for a very long time. It is a way for a judge to give what's called an equitable remedy, just like basic fairness, in which they say, no, this isn't just unconstitutional in Maryland or in New Jersey or California. It is unconstitutional as applied to everyone in the entire country. And you're exactly right about one other thing. This was an issue when Matthew Kacsmaryk in Amarillo, Texas, issued an injunction saying that mifepristone has to be taken off the market. So this has been a problem for presidents of both parties going back quite some time, where you have somebody just say, no, this is unconstitutional everywhere. And folks will recall this was used to stymie a whole bunch of President Biden's initiatives, right? So we could have a separate conversation about whether a single judge in a single district can make law for the whole country. But here's the kicker. The court had the opportunity not once, but twice to answer that question and say, oh, universal injunctions are really wrong and judges shouldn't be able to make law around the country. When Biden raised the issue, when the lower courts enjoined his student debt relief policy. And what they did was they said, no, we're not going to touch that issue. That's not an exigent burning issue. And so what we have, in a sense, when the court hands down this 6-3 kind of chin-stroking opinion authored by Amy Coney Barrett on the last day of the term, is we have a court that suddenly is on fire to solve a problem they didn't even think was a problem a year ago, right? They had an opportunity to solve this problem. Not only did they didn't touch it, but they didn't touch it multiple times. And so if you look in the dictionary under cynicism, this is what you find. And it is a court that is consistently using doctrines, right, that were nowhere in evidence when the Biden administration said, hey, nobody has standing to bring this challenge. And then the court's like, oh, well, let's think about, the student debt relief for months and months and let it not go into effect. And here they're like, oh, that's fine. Let's get rid of it altogether. And so I think what you really have to do is look at this. And this is of a piece with a huge trend from the court, which is when Biden did something, it violated the major questions doctrine, right? It violated some rule or another. The theory of executive power as applied to President Biden by these 6 justices is unrecognizable today. When if Trump asks them to do something, and as I said, time after time, they do it on an emergency docket without explaining A, that they're likely to win, that's a standard that they have to meet, or B, that they're going to suffer irreparable harm if this isn't resolved in their favor, another standard. They don't do any of that. They're just like, the president's super sad that he can't take away citizenship from millions of babies. So they win. And so I think that I put this in the sort of bucket of what was good for the goose is not good for the gander. And this court is inventing reasons to continuously put a thumb on the scale for Donald J. Trump.
Which is exactly what many of those people were put there to do. And I think we can see that quite clearly now. I mean, when this came down with the universal injunction thing, I thought, geez, where are the Second Amendment warriors on this one? I would think that they would be horrified by this because let's say this government said, I'm going to take all automatic weapons, all guns. I'm going to take all guns in America. And people were like, well, no, that's my Second Amendment right. And you're like, okay, well, every single person in every single district in America is going to have their own court case. And like, they might say it's legal in Texas, but in California, they might say it's not. Like, without universal injunctions, every single amendment in our Constitution that people take for granted is technically up for debate. And I find that so bizarre. Am I right in thinking that?
That's the dissent. The dissent, Justice Sotomayor dissenting in Birthright Citizenship gives exactly the hypo you just gave and is like, what's to stop the next president from simply, redlining through the Second
Whatever
Amendment?
They don't like.
And then there's no way that a court can say, no, this is unconstitutional everywhere. And more pointedly, the thing that the court did, I said this is a cynical play. They said, there's other ways, right, to get relief. And in fact, the word that Justice Barrett used was complete relief. The thing that they flagged, this goes to the second half of your question, was you can just create a class action, right? There's another way to do this. We don't have to have universal injunctions. Just go ahead and bring a class action. This is the same U.S. Supreme Court that has for decades now been making it harder and harder and harder for a judge to certify a class, to bring a class action suit. And this is a really kind of stellar, cynical Roberts Court play, which is, oh, we're going to shut the door on this, but you can do this other thing. But by the way, the other thing, we've either made it impossible to do or we're going to make it impossible to do. So a couple of years ago, you and I talked about how the court was like doing away with Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, but they were really clear. You still got Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Don't worry, you can effectuate your rights using Section 2. And now Section 2 is just about gone. So be really aware of the court sort of breezily saying, oh, well, when the founding happened, there weren't universal injunctions. And so, in the 18th century courts of chancery, judges couldn't do them. So we're just getting rid of them. But don't you worry, people will be able to get relief through a class action. It's really hard to do that. But the other point you made, and this is worth saying, is just at the end of 2 weeks ago, we had a judge who said, fine, I'm certifying a nationwide class. So he essentially was like, okay, Justice Barrett, if you say we're going to do this, we can't do this with a universal injunction, we have to do it with the class. I am telling you that every single baby born in the United States to non-citizen parents or parents who are not legal residents are now in this class. And so you're exactly right that we're seeing district courts accept the invitation, cynical though it may be, and force the court to kind of put its money where its mouth is.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this judge in New Hampshire has done, which I think is pretty fascinating. And it's also, again, to your original point about these lower court justices actually standing up for the Constitution and the rule of law. Because if people don't know, legal groups immediately started looking for the workaround. Because as you're saying, the Supreme Court was like, oh no, there's a way you can do it. You just need to do it like this. And they were like, fine, we'll do it like that. And so they started looking for it. And this judge in New Hampshire just issued another preliminary injunction blocking this idea of the birthright citizenship not counting executive order as a class action lawsuit for every child born in the United States. I think it's after the executive order denying birthright citizenship was signed. So it's like a really specific group of people. But he's done it specifically following the instructions as outlined by Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh in their majority opinion. So he's essentially said, I've done it exactly as you said. So when this gets back to you, which it obviously will, you're going to have a hard time denying that you wrote this in the first place. And I feel like that kind of gives us the idea that we might end up with 5 of 9 justices agreeing with themselves in many ways. You get the 3 liberal justices and then the 2 that wrote the opinion in the first place. And I feel like it's exactly what Justice Alito was concerned about, because he wrote a little concurrence to the majority opinion that was like, ugh, here's the thing. I don't love that there's this loophole for class action lawsuits. I feel like people might take advantage of that. And they are, which they should. But I feel like this is what Justice Alito was worried about. And do you think this was by error or by choice that they left this loophole open? While I know that coffee is a go-to for most people, me included, for some people it can cause crazy jitters or a massive crash, which is why I'm pleased to tell you about Mud Water. Mud Water is different than coffee. It's a mix of cacao, chai, turmeric, and adaptogenic mushrooms to help you feel focused and balanced, not wired. It's smooth and steady, and honestly, according to my husband, gives you tons of energy. Plus, it's ridiculously easy to make. It takes about 2 minutes with hot water or milk, and you're ready to get back to your day. Each ingredient in Mud Water serves a purpose. Their OG blend contains cacao and chai for a hint of caffeine and a hot chocolate flavor, lion's mane for focus, quadriceps to promote natural energy, and chaga and reishi to support healthy immune systems. Maybe you want to try a starter kit. They have a matcha starter kit, a turmeric starter kit, and a rest starter kit, which will help you unwind and sleep better with their Rubios, floral, chamomile, and Thai spices to end your day. Ready to make the switch to cleaner energy? Head to mudwater.com and grab your starter kit today. Right now, our listeners get an exclusive deal, up to 43% off your entire order, plus free shipping and a free rechargeable frother when you use the code PoliticsGirl. That's right, up to 43% off with the code PoliticsGirl at mudwtr.com. And after you purchase, they'll ask you how you found them. Please show the support for the show and let them know we sent you. Keep your energy natural and refreshing all year long with Mud Water, because life is too short for anything less than clean, delicious energy. So as I keep saying, I am not young. In fact, I am at that age where social media is very well aware and sends me all those over 40 makeup tips. So imagine my pleasure when I found out that GoPure wanted to work with the PoliticsGirl podcast. Here's the thing. I already use GoPure. They didn't need to convince me that their product was worth taking because I was already using it to tighten and lift my neck. They have a tighten and lift neck cream that is so good I have literally purchased it for other people. We talk so much about caring for the skin on our face, but it's often our neck that gives us away. Our neck is one of the first places to show aging because the skin on your neck is thinner and more delicate and less oily than our face, meaning it gets crepier faster. But GoPure's firming complex targets the unique concerns of the neck while nourishing and strengthening your skin for a more lifted and youthful look. Their advanced formula is designed to visibly firm, smooth, and rejuvenate the delicate skin on your neck and chest in as little to 4 to 8 weeks. So yes, I am very pleased to talk about GoPure. It's cruelty-free, paraben-free, and sulfate-free, and you know you're getting an effective care without any of those harsh chemicals. With over 1 million jars sold, this beauty secret is no longer a secret. And for a limited time, our listeners can get 25% off GoPure with the code PoliticsGirl at checkout. Just head to gopure.com/politicsgirl and use the code PoliticsGirl and you're all set. And after you buy, do us a favor. When they ask you where you heard about GoPure, tell them it was from our show, because it really helps. gopure.com/politicsgirl. I am telling you, it works. Do you think this was by error or by choice that they left this loophole open?
I mean, I think that you can read Justice Barrett's opinion to suggest that she wanted to be clear. I think she's very, very, very hard to parse in this opinion because she wants to do two things at once. She both wants to say, as an originalist, I'm telling you, the framers didn't contemplate this kind of relief. And at the same time, she's clearly not foreclosing the possibility that this can come back to the court. And I want to be super clear on one other thing. I don't think there are 5 votes, even at this broken John Roberts Supreme Court, to do away with birthright citizenship. In other words, it was very clear listening to oral arguments, and you're right, they never got to the question of whether the 14th Amendment means what it says it means, and everyone's always understood it to mean.
Well, good luck as originalists trying to argue that.
Exactly. Although don't forget, 1 year ago, the court said, right, that the insurrection clause that said, if you have fomented an insurrection, you can be removed from office. And the court, this is the court that said, oh no, as originalists, those words don't mean exactly what they explicitly were said to mean.
But that goes back to the thing you were saying about like the rules just don't apply to Trump. If Biden had asked for that, it would have applied to him.
100%.
I think that's the thing. I think that's the reason so many of us are losing our minds right now, right? Like it's just like it just feels so grossly unfair and a misuse of the law and a skewing of the law. And like the thing that's weighing on my mind right now is the kind of unitary executive theory, this thing you were talking about that happened last week, where the president has sort of full control over every government institution and agency and can kind of do whatever he wants with them. And this is how you see DOGE gutting our agencies and basically the shuttering of USAID and the gutting of the State Department and the NIH and the CDC and the FDA and the EPA. And you and I, we're talking right now, but like last week, the Supreme Court put out that unsigned order you were talking about that allowed them to fire basically everyone they wanted at the Department of Education. So they can't really close the Department of Education, which they wanted to do because it was created by Congress, so it has to be closed by Congress, but they can fire everyone in it. They can cut all their funding so it doesn't work, right? And just like firings at the State Department, it deeply affects how the institution itself functions. So they're basically breaking it and then being like, oh, look, it's broken. And like, that's allowed by our Supreme Court.
That's right. And again, I would say like compare that in your mind to the same Supreme Court that wouldn't let, President Biden's student debt relief go into effect, right? Sat on it forever and then was like, oh, no, like this, the idea that this is an emergency is, when it wasn't an emergency the last time the court dealt with, and then it was a major question, right? That was not fitting for the president to do without sign off. And here it's like, oh, this isn't a major question. But I under that, I think there's two things. One is be super crystal clear. Birthright citizenship happens on the merits docket, right? There's an argument. The Solicitor General argues in front of the court. The court issues an opinion. It might be an obscure opinion. It might be a snot out your nose funny opinion by Justice Barrett, but at least we have some sense of guidance. And as you say, we then have a judge in New Hampshire say, okay, this means what it says it means. I'm going to create a nationwide class. What happened with the Department of Education was not that, right? That's the term ends. Right. The justices are supposed to be gone. I guess they're having Zoom meetings. And they just issue this unsigned opinion that says, what just happened at the Department of Education, which is just the wholesale firing of about half of the employees, is fine. We're not telling you why. We're not giving you reasons. This was never briefed. Right? The court just is doing it because they can. And I just want to emphasize how dangerous and lawless that is from an institution that has to explain its reasons, not just to the public for legitimacy reasons, but to lower courts so that they know what to do in the future in similar situations with similar fact patterns. There's no explanation. They're just gone. And now it's up to the rest of us to figure it out. But the thing that you're saying that is really essential is that it was abundantly clear. Donald Trump ran on ending the Department of Education. Linda McMahon was brought in, right, to put herself out of a job. She was absolutely clear that what she was going to do was turn out the lights and lock the doors and throw away the key. That was a part of Project 2025. And the defense that the Trump administration offers when they fire half the staff whose job is to implement the congressional will in having a Department of Education. And their answer is, oh, we're not ending the department. We're just streamlining it. So this is that Doge answer, right? We're making it more efficient. And you have affidavit after affidavit in this case saying they're not making it more efficient. They're making it impossible for millions and millions and millions of dollars that are already allocated to do a whole bunch of really essential programs, including civil rights protections of students, including all sorts of special needs assistance for kids with special needs, including all sorts of language education. Those people are all gone. And probably by the time folks hear this podcast, the rest of them may be gone. And so the absolute fiction that this is about streamlining as opposed to ending the department is the really, really chilling thing. And in this sense, it maps perfectly onto the conversation we just had about birthright citizenship, right? Because the court doesn't decide, but in not deciding, it is a fait accompli, right? Across the country, if birthright citizenship can go into effect in some states and not into others, right? You're a baby born in New Jersey, you're a citizen. You're a baby born in Pennsylvania, you're not. If that is allowed to go into effect, we've done away with birthright citizenship without the court ever touching the issue. And that's what's happening here too. The court, by not deciding or not telling us the reasons, has just put a thumb on the scale for ending the Department of Education, and none of us knows why.
Yeah. And I think so many people, I mean, look, this is happening in the summer when kids are not in school, when people are not paying attention, when they're sort of busy with other things. And I think a lot of people are going to be so blindsided by these cuts, and not just from K through 12 schools, but like you're saying, you know, special needs funding, Title IX protections, you know, student loans. You know, I'm personally freaking out because I have a child who's supposed to go to college next year, but these cuts might deeply affect any money you can get to have your kid go to college. So I'm not even sure at this exact moment if my kid can go to college now. He's worked his whole life to go to college. And I'm like, the schools he's looking at, we can't afford that. Like there's no way. No one should, by the way. Colleges have become so extraordinarily expensive. But we are like, with financial aid, we can do. But if they get rid of financial aid, which is part of what the Department of Education did, then it's going to put people in such dire straits. I mean, the court has basically given Trump and his administration just carte blanche to gut the government. And I think we should keep in mind that the conservative movement has always talked about making government so small you could drown it in a bathtub, right? And that's obviously what they're doing with all of these agencies, from the Department of Education to the EPA to the CDC, like NIH, whatever. But they're also at the same time supersizing our government when it comes to things like ICE, right? Like we're like 20 timesing the amount of unmarked, you know, agents that can go out in the street and rip people out of their homes. So it's the weirdest sort of juxtaposition because there's no logic to it. It's just cruelty, destruction, and it's totally rubber stamped by these people that are supposed to be the final arbiters on what is right, what is constitutional, what our founding fathers originated in their founding documents. They've always had an agenda, this court. This has always been an activist court, no matter what we say. And this 6-3 conservative majority that we see all the time, they're clearly putting your thumb on the scale, as you're saying, for what they already had as their agenda, what they were trained in the Federalist Society to look for, what they were put on the bench to do. And I think about like all the wins they had for quote unquote religious freedom this year. The biggest decision I'm thinking of is like children can be withdrawn from LGBTQ school material. Parents can now opt out of certain curriculums based on religious grounds if they don't want their children to learn about anything that has to do with the LGBTQ issue, despite the disruption that might count to the school learning environment, to civil rights, to anything like that. It's these religious elements that keep coming back up. And I feel like the people were there to represent money and to represent religion. Am I off base in thinking that?
You're not at all off base. And I would just say it's almost impossible not to think of the case you just described. That's Mahmoud v. Taylor, where you've got religious parents who say, I don't want my kid to be exposed to these LGBTQ books in school, right? They're children's books, the sweetest, most anodyne children books. Like they can't be on the shelves.
Yeah, like the Penguin book. Yeah.
Heckler's veto, you know, again, the dissent in that case was like, this is public education. The absolute crown jewel of the American democratic experiment is public education, where you are exposed to ideas that you don't necessarily agree with. That is how you create a tolerant, pluralistic, diverse democracy, right? That respects everyone. And this is part of dismantling that. As you say, it's not an accident. Ronald Reagan also wanted to destroy the Department of Education. It's not an accident that they keep putting people in charge of departments that don't believe in the department. So whether it's McMahon now or Betsy DeVos before, they don't believe in public education. And much more pointedly, and I think this is what you're really trying to drive home, is that to give any parent a religious heckler's veto, and let's be very clear about what's going to happen, right? Schools are going to take every book off the shelves that might possibly offend someone's religious views, right? Schools are not going to invite lawsuits. They're not going to wait to have crushing, debilitating lawsuits by parents.
Well, especially if they have no money in the Department of Education to fight any lawsuits.
Exactly. The coffers are empty. And now they're going to take those books off the shelves. And what you are going to see is parents who have religious objections to interracial marriage, right? Parents who have, don't forget, Loving versus Virginia, the case that allowed interracial marriage. The district court opinion in that case was written by a judge who said, this is what God wants. God doesn't want the races to mix. So I think we should not fool ourselves that this ends with LGBTQ books. This is any book that offends any parent's religious values can be yanked from the shelves. And this is anathema to the idea that we want kids to go to school and be exposed to all sorts of ideas, chief among them tolerance. And the only other wrinkle that is really worth pulling at is that this term the court also said in a case called Skermetti that parents do not have the right to give their children who are suffering from gender dysphoria puberty blockers and other drugs that might help alleviate that. In other words, if you are a trans minor and your parents and your doctor say that it is absolutely necessary for you to get those treatments in order to avoid just crippling unhappiness as you move through the world, parents don't have a right to do that. The state can countermand that. So parents' rights when it's about your religion, if the religion is one that is shared by or respected by the court, and no parents' rights when it is the fundamental question that has been protected in this country for over 100 years, which is directing your kids' medical care. That's gone.
Yeah.
The same parents who didn't want their kids to wear masks, right? They get to drive policy for the whole school board. But parents who want their kids to be able to move through the world in the gender that conforms with their sense of who they are, those parents have no rights. So I think, again, it goes to this theme. We keep pulling at the same theme over and over again. These are not universal rules. There's not even an attempt to say, let's find some congruence between what we did in this case and this case. It's simply that religious parents can absolutely assert that there will be no books that offend their religion on the classroom shelves. And parents who are seeking medical treatment that is approved by every medical association in the country, no, they can't have that.
Today's episode is brought to you by Honeylove, the brand redefining modern shapewear with real comfort and serious support. I don't know about you, but as soon as the temperature starts going up, I don't want anything bulky or tight or uncomfortable on my body, especially in the bra department. This summer, it's all about staying cool and comfortable while still supported, and that's where Honeylove's cutting-edge bra innovation comes in. If you're still dealing with underwire pokes from bras that feel like body armor, it is time for a serious upgrade. Honeylove makes the best wireless bras. They are lightweight, breathable, and perfect for hot summer days. Whether you're wearing a t-shirt, a tank top, or a sundress, their bras give just the right amount of lift without the squeeze, thanks to years of research, development, and testing. Honeylove's signature support comes from smart design, not stiff wires or puffy padding. all the shape and hold you want without all of the stuff you don't. Honeylove recently launched their new Cloud Embrace bra, which sold out in days. It's a modern wireless t-shirt bra with lightly padded foam cups that feel like a cloud against your skin. It's a wireless bra for those who love underwire. And it's in stock now, but it is bound to sell out again. So go ahead, ditch the discomfort, treat yourself to the most comfortable and innovative bras on earth, and save 20% off site-wide at honeylove.com/politicsgirl. Use our exclusive link to get 20% off at honeylove.com/politicsgirl. And as always, after you purchase, if they ask you where you heard about them, please support the show and tell them that we sent you. Experience the new standard in bras with Honeylove. Right now, our headlines are packed with data breaches, regulatory rollbacks, and phishing expeditions that make us all vulnerable. But you can do something about it. Delete Me is here to make it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online. The fact of the matter is we're all at risk. How many times have you gotten a text or an email or a letter saying your data has been compromised? It's very unsettling. But the good news is Delete Me can help. Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping you and your family's personal information from data broker websites. Sign up and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts will take it from there. You will then get personalized privacy reports showing what they found, where they found it, and what they removed. Delete Me is constantly working for you, monitoring and removing your personal information that you don't want on the internet. And it's not a one-time service. As someone with a very active online presence, privacy is obviously very important to me. But you don't have to do what I do to feel this way. You hear these stories about hackers obtaining names and addresses and phone numbers, social security information, plus family members' information. I'm just very grateful that there's groups like Delete Me available to help keep our information from falling into the wrong hands. So take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/politicsgirl and use the promo code politicsgirl at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/politicsgirl and enter the code politicsgirl at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/politicsgirl with the code politicsgirl.
And parents who are seeking medical treatment that is approved by every medical association in the country, no, they can't have that.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to the same idea that we keep coming back to over and over again, no matter what we're talking about, whether it's birthright citizenship, whether it's taking away naturalized citizenship, whether it's who the court listens to. It's that some Americans matter and some Americans don't matter. Some voices count more than other voices, and they keep telling us it over and over again in every single kind of decision. You know, who can I pick up off the street and throw into a concentration camp? Right now, it's this group of people, right? Who do I listen to when it comes to which books come off the shelf? Who do I listen to when it's which parents actually matter in this case? Like, I was going to ask you what you think of some of the other big cases from this year, but it's like, you know, my first one was medical providers stopping puberty blockers and hormone therapy from these poor transgender minors, right? But there's so many other cases that happened this year, but I feel like the same thing keeps coming up, and it's who matters, who counts, who is an American, whose voice has weight in the room. And you were talking about, like, you know, this has been happening since Reagan was in office. And I'm like, yeah, because it's the same group. It's the Heritage Foundation. They have been writing policy and trying to get their sort of far-right Christian plans into policies since the 80s. They were there getting their stuff done when Reagan was in power, and they've got so much farther along with Project 2025 now. And I think the whole thing is that when you look at it, it just feels so discouraging. It just is like another attack after another attack. And it's hard not to feel like the structure of the country is falling apart around us. You know, this sort of faith we had in the three branches of government, and they were all checks on each other. It feels like, well, Congress has completely abdicated its responsibility at all. They'll just be a rubber stamp for whatever Donald Trump wants, with Republicans both in the House and the Senate. And then the court itself has decided they are, I don't know, standard bearers or whatever the Trump administration. And by that, I don't think that it's really Trump themselves that they're supporting it, but the Heritage Foundation people. And it just feels like, geez, like, is anyone noticing this? And then I think about someone like Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson out there sort of on her own. And I go, well, at least she gets it, right? Like, I read what she writes, and it feels like she's speaking the truth in a way that makes me feel like I'm not going crazy, because here's a Supreme Court justice herself acknowledging how off the radar her court has become. At least it makes me feel less insane. What are your thoughts on Ketanji Brown Jackson?
I mean, I think I want to start by saying it is very interesting to me that the three liberal justices, and let's just say it, all of them women, are reacting in very, very different ways to this kind of juggernaut, this six justice juggernaut. And, I don't play favorites. I mean, I think they're all doing really different things. I think that Justice Elena Kagan is an institutionalist, and she really deeply believes to the marrow of her bones that her job is to decide the case in front of her. Like, that is the job. And, doing, a TED talk on the side about the end of democracy, when it's not appropriate, she won't do it. Justice Sotomayor has been not nearly as fierce as Justice Jackson, but Justice Sotomayor has been, including in the education case we just talked about, the Department of Education, firing half the staff. She's been like on fire, and has been writing some pretty spicy and uncharacteristically for her spicy dissents, often making some of these claims about, look, in the Birthright Citizenship case, she was like, why is the court playing the game that, this is legit and that Trump is a normal president? So she's willing to call it out. But you're exactly right. Justice Jackson is willing to go way beyond them. And sometimes she writes for herself alone. In the Birthright Citizenship case, everybody signed on, all three of them signed on to Justice Sotomayor's dissent, but Justice Jackson wrote for herself alone and nobody signed on, because what she is saying is the thing that you are articulating, which is nothing is all right about this. I am seeing patterns. And I had Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island on my podcast last week, and I loved how he put it. He said, you can continue to look at every case in isolation, like a law professor, and be like, well, maybe there were no universal injunctions at the time of the founding. And you can make a plausible case that Amy Coney Barrett's kind of civil procedure exam case, writing of the case in CASA in the Birthright Citizenship, is plausible on its face. But what he said is judges are trained to do one thing, which is see patterns. Nobody says, hey, I'm discriminating against all Black voters, right? Or I'm only giving jobs to white employees. This is the nature of the justice system, is you see patterns across, similar cases, and you see patterns across time. And everything you and I have said in this conversation is about patterns, right? Attacks on education, giving a huge hand up to religious dissenters, but only of some religions, right? Suppressing the vote, allowing big money to distort democracy. These are the patterns of the Roberts Court. And all Justice Jackson is doing, says Senator Whitehouse, and I thought it was so interesting, is calling out patterns and saying, these are the kind of people who win all the time. These are the kinds of cases that keep weirdly popping up on the shadow docket. These are the kinds of things that we're doing that is sending democracy through a wood chipper. And so I think you're exactly right. I mean, the way I've been thinking about it is, and you and I have had this conversation, I know, several times, is that she doesn't look at American constitutional democracy as though it's perfect or even close to perfected. She's like, hey, it was an imperfect system that, for all the reasons you and I talk about, gerrymandering and a malapportioned Senate and money in politics, right, after Citizens United, it's never been a perfected democracy, and I choose not to see it as that. And so I think that what she's doing a tiny bit is code switching between the world that she grew up in, which is, if you were a Black woman in Tennessee long before Dobbs, you had no right to an abortion, right? If you were a voter in Georgia and you were Black, long before the court started trashing, the Voting Rights Act or putting other impediments in the way, requiring ID to vote, long before that, it was impossible to vote, not like it was for. So what she's essentially saying is, like, these two worlds have always existed side by side, a world in which there's a fantasy that you have perfect justice, and a world in which we never even got all that close, but we're trying. And what she's doing, I think, right now is code switching and saying, I see this. I see what happens when you send brown people to CCOT prison in El Salvador without giving them due process. I know what happens when you send a bunch of people to Sudan, a country where no American is safe, and you don't give them any kind of ability to say, hey, under the torture statutes, you can't send me there. This is not unfamiliar to her.
Right.
And so what I think she's doing, I love the language you used, is like, if you feel like you're going crazy, I think she is writing from that place of like, you are not going crazy because I see what you see. And I think that there is this kind of existential question for the court about her talking this way. You know, she gave a speech where she was like, I lie awake at night and I worry about the future of democracy. And I think that there is this really hard question to which I actually don't know that I have the answer, which is she saving the court or is she burning it down? And, you know, I don't know, but I think that for her to be writing and speaking the way she is right now and saying, I see patterns, I see who wins on the shadow docket every time. I see that the Trump administration lies in the lower court and then is rewarded by this court. What she's trying to tell you is that the patterns you and I have been describing in this conversation are as visible to her as they are to you and me.
Yeah. Like, I don't think she's necessarily writing for herself. I always think she's writing to bypass the legal wonks, right? She's writing for the public. She's talking to the people who aren't lawyers and judges. She's telling us it's not wrong to question our faith in the court. There was a Balls and Strikes article that came out about her recently, which is like a legal paper for people who are, you know, in the legal world. And they basically said, maybe most importantly, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is urging people to be skeptical of the story the court loves to tell about itself, that its task of, you know, interpreting the law is not political, because that has always been wrong. And it's always had politics tied into it. Like, they are not above politics. They have actually always been entrenched in politics. And she's the first person to come this close to saying it out loud. And I feel like that's super important. Like, I've read a bunch of opinion pieces about her that basically are like, she's either the DEI hire, if you read that opinion piece, or she's the conscience of the Supreme Court, right? And I'm on the conscience side because it seems like she's the only one who is just saying what needs to be said, no matter the tradition or what other justices say or what other, you know, years would have dictated. And I feel like that's so essential. Like, I think about the court out here saying, yeah, go ahead, destroy, you know, all our federal agencies. It was basically like a 2-page paper that they threw out there. Like, yeah, go ahead, fire whoever you want. And she wrote like a 15-page dissent on that little sort of throwaway they did that allows it. And she said, the Balls and Strikes writer put it well. He said, it came as close as a Supreme Court justice will ever get to characterizing their colleagues as breathtakingly full of shit. And I thought that was so well said, because I was like, we need that. Otherwise, we're going to be like, well, what can we do? Because, I mean, when you were here last year, you said this idea that there's nothing we can do about this horribly corrupt Supreme Court is wrong. Like, that's bullshit. If you get cancer, you don't just say, well, I have cancer. Like, I guess that's what happens. And I guess this is what, you know, no, you fight it, right? You go to the experts, you find a way to get the best outcome possible. And that's what we have to do with our courts. We can't just allow these people to burn down 250 years of self-rule without any pushback, right? And now we had that conversation last year before the election when we totally blew it. But we have handed the keys to this castle over to like this narcissistic sociopath and the puppet masters that run him. So are you still feeling hopeful, or should we all just, you know, pitch ourselves off a cliff?
I love that question. This is one of the reasons I love coming on your show, is like I feel like we can talk about, you know, the footnotes of the dissents in these opinions until the cows come home. Sure. And it doesn't change the kind of learned helplessness, which is, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. And the reason I love the way you just put that is that, and I probably said this on your show last year, the court has no actual power. It is by design right? It is the weakest branch of government. Go back and read the Federalist Papers, my friends. It has neither the purse nor the sword. It has no army. It has nothing except public reliance upon the court as an institution that does its job, right? With like integrity and with dignity and with honesty. And so when we get in this weird posture, which is like, well, the emperor has no clothes and has no actual power. But instead of saying that, we're just going to be like, oh, we couldn't expand the court, right? We couldn't change the court. We couldn't do structural court reform, right? We had a lot of years in which we were having conversations, including you and I having conversations about we need to add seats to the court. We need to have age limits. We need to have, right? Every other constitutional court in the world has either term limits or age limits or jurisdiction limits or
ethics rules.
And right around the time you and I talked last year, you will appreciate I interviewed former Justice Rosalie Abella from the Canadian Supreme Court, who is a legend. And the show that we had was so crazy because she was like, no other court would ever have no guardrails.
Yeah.
And the Canadian Supreme Court, she was like, you know why I'm not in the court? Because we have age limits. You know why? Like, people don't do what Alito and Thomas do because there's ethics rules. So like, this is a choice. We have made a choice to say we are helpless. And we are not helpless. There are things to be done. And for all the people who are like, well, Dahlia, we can't do them now. I just want to really sort of upend the paradigm because I always say, and I've probably said it on your show, our job right now is to be a little bit bigger than we are. Our job right now is to be, I always joke when you're camping at Yellowstone Park and they put up the sign that's like, if you see a brown bear, be bigger than you are. And you're always like, dude, I can't be bigger than I am. Like the laws of physics militate. Oh, there you go. Look at you.
This is me being bigger.
You are exactly. Our job right now is to be bigger than we are. And you know what the court is trying to do right now? The court is trying to be bigger than it is. A court that hands down a 3-sentence shadow docket decision that doesn't explain itself, but just says, we're the boss of you, is a court that has no actual power, but is trying to be bigger than it is. And by the way, Donald Trump, who is trying to be bigger than he is, right? He doesn't have the power to change the law by way of executive order. He can't scupper what Congress has put into effect and say, I'm just going to end the Department of Education. He doesn't have the power to do that. So the court is conferring upon itself and upon this president the power to be bigger than they are. And so what I want to say is, we can choose to say, oh, that court is huge. That court is the all-powerful Oz. This president is huge. He is the all-powerful, executive, maximalist, like unitary executive of all time. There's nothing we can do. But you know who actually is sovereign? Not them. Not them. You being a big bear, like being bigger than you are. And so I really think, just to link it back both to what Justice Jackson is doing and what you're asking, is I think this is a really good moment to say what Jackson is saying is I'm going to be bigger than I am. I am one of 9 justices. I am one of 3 dissenters. I'm just losing all the time, but I am not going to just kind of like mince off into the night and be sad, at home. I am going to be huge because that is the power I have. And what she's saying is that this court is actually behaving in ways that are very small. And so we have to make choices, and they're huge structural choices about democracy and about gerrymandering and about how voting is going to work. And all those things are work, and they are a lifetime of work. I'm not going to lie and say this is fixed in the next election or the election after.
Nope.
But we are big enough to do this. We've done it before. Who's not big enough to be vast and capacious and unassailable? The U.S. Supreme Court. And that's what Jackson is reminding us. And that's what we need to understand. The power inheres not in 9 justices who don't have an army and don't have a purse. The power inheres in the sovereign citizens who can choose to say that court is vast, or who can choose to say we are vast.
Dahlia, That's amazing.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much
Oh.
for that. I mean, listen, if people are thinking like, but what do we do? I want you to know, like, let me remind you, Supreme Court justices can be impeached. They can be impeached. That's not an easy fix, but we should have already done it with 2 of them that are taking bribes. I should remind people that Congress can fix a lot of these interpretations that they have done through legislation. Congress can change a lot of the executive orders by making legislation that just negates it. The next president, if it wasn't, a Donald Trump acolyte or someone that was following the Heritage Foundation's playbook, could get rid of every executive order Donald Trump ever signed. That's why we don't make laws by executive orders. We could protect the women's right to bodily autonomy. We could protect the Voting Rights Act. We could sign the For the People's Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which already exist. The majority of damage these activist right-wing justices have done can be reversed by a Democratic-controlled Congress and a Democratic president, and then by expanding the court and stop pretending that they're not broken, because they are. And we have to look at it differently, and we have to say, you know what? If anything, the Democrats should be running on fixing the courts. That should be a huge thing that they run on. So don't act like we are helpless. We're not. It sucks. It's terrible. They are very scary right now, but it does not mean that we have to get ourselves smaller. Like you're saying, we must just get bigger. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Dahlia. I love you. Thank you for being so smart and helping us understand all this. Please tell people how they can follow your work moving forward, because you add so much to the conversation.
I write about the courts and the law at Slate, and I'm a contributor at MSNBC, and my podcast is called Amicus. And a lot of the stuff you and I have talked about today, I've really been thinking about in real time in the last couple of weeks on the show. I mean, we are very, very, very vulnerable on the show about how immense the structural problems are, and also about how, like, we can't, I know you get these letters too, we cannot get letters from people saying, I give up, or I'm just going to like take care of my parochial interests and make sure my kids are okay. Because like I'm tempted to do the same thing, but I always say, like, every time you do that, Stephen Miller gets new wings. Like, we are not in the business of giving up. And so I just really, it's one of the reasons I always love to talk to you. I think, again, particularly as women, in a moment where it just feels like we're being sidelined and diminished and like replaced with like weird, Barbie Homeland Security people, that, we are unbelievably powerful. And that, like, I think we have to just understand that this is going to be, for your kids and for my kids and for everyone's kids, like, this is the work of a generation, but like no ability, I think, to desist. So I'm so grateful for you and what you do every single day. It's extraordinary. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. The feeling is entirely mutual. So that was Dahlia Lithwick, reminding us that our job right now is to be bigger than we are, that we are big enough to fight back because we have done it before. The court itself has no real power, not of the purse or the sword. Their power is derived fundamentally from our belief in their power. So even if it comes to a corrupt administration supported by a corrupted Supreme Court, we cannot default to helplessness. They are not the all-powerful Oz, just like Trump himself is not some all-powerful king. We are living in dangerous and lawless times, but we cannot allow these people to keep telling us who counts, who matters, and who is an American, because we all count and we all matter, and the American public have to flex our power at all times. I want to thank Dahlia for joining us today, and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go download Amicus for a weekly gift of Dahlia's insight on the courts, because the more we know, the better prepared we are to change what's wrong. Until next week, PG out. Before you go, are you interested in getting this podcast ad-free, delivered directly to your inbox along with my kitchen rants? Then please consider becoming a member of PoliticsGirl Premium by going to politicsgirl.com and signing up. If you are already a premium member of this podcast, thank you so much for your support. And if you're not a member, please consider becoming a patron of my work. Mainstream news is only giving you some version of billionaire-backed propaganda at this point. So if you really want real knowledge, it's essential to support those of us out here still bringing it to you. There is a link to sign up in the bio of this episode, but also on politicsgirl.com. And as always, please like and share this podcast so we can grow our audience. Because the more people who have access to this kind of information, the better. As always, thank you for your time and support. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.